My guest today has a resume as long as a novel. One of those items on his resume list includes being the assistant to the founder of North America's largest funeral cemetery company. He is a consummate funeral director. If you've watched a state or high-profile funeral on television in the last 20 years or so, there's a good chance you've seen him. My friend Bob Boetticher Sr. is the founder of the LHT Consulting Group and has been its CEO and its leader of the Ceremonial Funeral Team since its inception until his recent semi-retirement. Through their vast knowledge and experience in the profession, coupled with strict adherence to confidentiality and discretion, LHT Consulting has planned and directed some of the country's most prominent, high-profile, and official funerals. We will take a peek behind the curtain as to how all this works and the incredible organization and detailed planning necessary to execute at such a high level on the largest stages. Bob is also a well-known funeral historian and is a much-in-demand speaker on topics such as what comprises a state funeral and the meaning behind each part. He also has been a contributing columnist for several industry publications and will discuss some of his topics. Bob also has a few television credits. If you've ever watched 6 Feet Under, you will learn a little about his consulting role in that series, and he will discuss others. If you're currently a part of the funeral profession or are considering becoming a part of it, I encourage you to listen to all of this conversation. In the end, Bob will talk about what it takes to become successful in the funeral profession. You do not want to miss the insight and wisdom of a man who has reached the pinnacle in our field.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I have a special guest with me today. Bob Boetticher Sr. is with me. Bob, thank you so much for being on here with me today.
Well, it's a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, you're renowned in our profession, and it really is an honor. Bob, let's start by talking about, I know that you are the founder of LHT Consulting, and I know people listening to this, many won't know what that is, but talk about this organization and your role over the years and what it's about.
Well, LHT Consulting Group is a division of Service Corporation International. And after our team was honored to serve President Reagan, one thing that Bob Boetticher, who was, at that time was the founder and chairman of SCI, we were talking that ultra-high net worth clients or notable people need the same type of structure as a state funeral. Everything you saw on TV on a state funeral is written down on a piece of paper. So as the years went on, Mr. Waltrip and I kept talking about it. In 2011 is when we decided to form LHT Consulting Group, and our client base is ultra-high net worth or notable people. Not all notable people are high net worth. It has really begun with one service, and now we have a client base of clients that we are working with now on different segments of their planning.
So it is an ongoing thing. I know you've been involved with that. You're stepping back. You're going in a little bit of semi-retirement mode, and you've got a guy that you have mentored through the years, John DeBoer, that's going to take your place. Is that correct? And to talk about him a minute and his role with LHT.
Correct. John was Senior Vice President of Operations. Once I decided that I'm going to step back, then this past September, I did step back and John assumed the President and CEO of LHT Consulting Group. John has been with me for quite some time.
Yeah.
He also went to a protocol school in Washington, D.C. So he has a vast knowledge of protocols, of state funerals, large televised funerals. John knows really how to do that and lead it.
He's a great guy. I've been able to meet him several times. He may still office in Charlotte, and so I was in and out of Charlotte a lot and got to meet him and got to know him, and he is definitely a pro. There's no question about it. We're going to not talk about details here because this is what you're leading or have led through the years is very confidential, and it's an important piece of your business model with LHT. So talk a little bit about the confidentiality piece of this.
Well, that's the cornerstone of our business because most of our clients are public figures. They expect the confidentiality. We expect it from our team members and from third-party vendors that we hire to come in. So everybody is on an agreement, but it doesn't matter if it's us, LHT, or if it's you, your own funeral home.
Right.
For those that are listening, you don't ever want to get caught sitting in a coffee shop and talking about one of your families and you're overheard because you'll never get that back. You have destroyed your reputation. We want to be sure that never happens. So we are really careful about the confidentiality. But as I said, it's a cornerstone of our business. It should be the cornerstone of anybody's funeral business.
For sure.
Even with our limousine drivers that are involved in a high-profile funeral, we've asked those drivers, don't come back and tell us what was said. Take it to your grave.
Boy, what a lesson. What a lesson. That's true in our business. That's true in most any other business you get into.
You take Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett had said, it'll take you 20 years to build your reputation and 5 minutes to tear it down.
Yeah. Isn't that true? Isn't that true?
It's true.
So what I can't imagine, I remember running my own funeral home and the pressure of some of these big funerals when you had a lot going on. People that are not in the funeral business have no idea all the details that goes on in producing a funeral. It really is a show. It really is a production if you do it right. I can't imagine the pressure you've been under through your career with some of these high-profile funerals that are on national TV. You got to talk a little bit about the pressure you felt and the exhilaration you felt when you pulled it off and it worked. I haven't seen any of these things not work perfectly. So talk about a little bit about that, Bob.
Well, we always learn something new on every one that we do, and we strive to be perfect. And the team that works with us, they're the ones that really do the hard work. They're the ones that work the long, incredible hours in trying to make this thing work. We only have one shot to get it right.
Yeah,
only one. Because you can't roll the tape back and do it again.
That's true.
And there are so many moving pieces. So our team members of the ceremonial funeral team, a lot of them are a specialist in something. One may run motorcades. One may be a communications guy, with radios. One or two may be really good at lead advancing. That's going to the church in advance. They're in charge of the church until that the hearse comes. So each one of the event sites has their moving pieces. And if one piece falls through the cracks or the family makes a change, which happens quite often,
sure,
it's a roll down effect because this particular movement will affect this one and this one and this one. So we always expect the unexpected. And I guess what was funny my granddaughter, who was 13, said something. She was getting frustrated. And I said, honey, be like Gumby and be very flexible.
That's true, isn't it?
And she responded back, who? I said, you don't know who Gumby is? She goes, no. I use the Gumby one with the team. Be really flexible and be sure that you have yourself covered. And we communicate a lot. We wear radios.
Yeah,
and we can talk to each other.
Yeah, you have them in your earpiece in your ear, right?
Right. So when we enact a funeral plan, this plan has been approved by the family. This is what the family wants. It's our job to do it flawlessly and to do it to them, because the people that are coming, this funeral reflects on the family, because the family has a theme of what they're trying to tell the people coming, that the decedent was a philanthropist, or the decedent liked trains, or the decedent would go down to Africa and then work maybe Habitat for Humanity. Who knows? It's our job to get that message out.
One of the things that I can't help but think about you is you obviously in your career have thrived under pressure, because this is a high pressure situation you got, not only with the most of the time very high profile people you're dealing with, but you've got the whole nation watching in some of these instances. So you must thrive on pressure, because that's a lot of pressure. At the end of the day, it's on you to make sure it all goes right, or it has been, right?
Right. And the end of the day, all we want to hear from myself and our team is somebody in the family that says, thank you. We couldn't have done it without you.
And that's true for every funeral director that's ever been in this business. Those words mean a whole lot, for sure. That is for sure. You just have done it at a different level with a different, much wider audience, for sure. But the same thing, if you do it right, happens all over, everywhere, every day. People that do funerals right. One thing that it's always hit me is, as I watch televised funerals, whether it's a state funeral or whether it's just a high-profile funeral, is they remind the public of the value of a funeral ceremony. We live in a world where we're having less and less of that, and it's almost like when we see one of these, wow, this is what I got into business for. This is really honoring a human being in an incredible way. Talk about the importance of that you've seen in your career.
Well, you're 100% right. Our phones will ring. Hey, we watched the funeral service. We really like this. We really like that. You know, the way that you guys did this and did that, because we're always looking for ways to improve it, of what we do, and to really get it down to precision, because we just aren't representing the family on one of these. We're representing funeral service. And we need to constantly let the public know the importance of funeral service. It doesn't matter if you have a graveside service or if you have one in the National Cathedral. It's a tribute to a deceased. Our job is to direct the service in a way that the people watching on TV will see the respect that's being paid to the family and the deceased.
Yeah, and anybody that's in the funeral business sees these things and they have chill bumps, because they realize, wow, absolutely amazing. It doesn't matter who you work for, where you are, you can't help but notice when these things happen. The other thing, I always say this, Bob, it's important for people to take care of the business of death before the family gets in the middle of the agony of it. But in your situation with LHT and these high-profile funerals, many times the planning for these services go back years in advance. It's not like a one meeting that funeral directors meet with families and make a pre-arrangement and write everything down on the form. There's a lot about detailed planning that goes on for years in many cases. So talk a little bit about how that works.
We have had clients to where it's taken up to 12 years to plan the service. And it just depends of who that the person is, of really how much work will go into the plan. We have seen very small family gatherings.
Sure.
And that planning sometimes takes as long. We've also seen to where that we go out many years because that there's a lot of moving pieces and that the family dynamics change. Also, the family will change its mind. And as I said, it doesn't matter really the size of the service, if it's on TV or not, because we work with family offices. They're more regional than some that are at the national level.
Folks, you're listening to Bob Boetticher Sr. We'll be right back. So the question I get asked probably more than any other about the ceremonial team or the LHT Consulting is, how do these high-profile families know to call you? How did they know you exist? Talk a little bit about that and how you've established your reputation.
It's word of mouth. We don't advertise at all. And when we first did our very first service, we formed the team, and then we were going to disband the team after the funeral because it was a large funeral, very large. So we did it, and we disbanded the team, and everybody went back to doing what they normally do. Another high-profile family calls the first family, "Who'd you use?" And then my name was given, and my cell phone rang, and then I interviewed with that family. They hired. So we put the team back together again. And then one thing has led to another. That's more or less how that people find out about us. When their office of the client starts to look into, well, we need the funeral plan, they may talk to somebody that has already seen us, already knows who we are, and they'll say, I would call LHT Consulting Group.
Right.
And then we get the call.
Right.
Some just called is just to ask information. But sometimes it takes, from when they first call us, up to 3 years for them to finally say, hey, this is what I want to do. Because we're selling a service that nobody wants. Nobody even wants to talk about it.
Isn't that the truth?
And we have found that among many of the families that we've served.
It's word of mouth. It's your reputation. It's no different than your funeral home, regular funeral home out here. You grow it by people knowing who you are and watching what you do, right?
Well, and the different SCI funeral homes may have a high-profile funeral, and they will call us for assistance.
Right.
So that we'll come in, stay in behind the scenes, implement the plan, leave town, and they are the ones that should get all of the credit because that's the town they live in.
Sure.
So many times we're in stealth mode. We'll go into a city, we will help that funeral home perform the funeral, and then we leave quietly.
Yes, I've seen that happen in places that I've operated over the years, as you know, and that we called you guys in. So let me ask you another question I get asked a lot is, how do funeral directors or specialists nationwide, how do they get on this ceremonial team? What are you looking for? How does that process work?
Well, our company employs, I think, 22,000 employees, and they're all good. They're all very good. But for the ceremonial funeral team, we need a very unique person that really sets the standard. So it's kind of a rigorous process. Every few years, we will have some openings, and that's when the process starts. So if somebody is interested, they need to go to their market leadership, have them make the introduction to our team. And it also assures us that they will be available when we call.
Sure.
What most people don't realize, the team that we have now, the Ceremonial Funeral Team, they're on call 24 hours a day.
Right.
And they have to be able to drop what they're doing and go. So if they are a location manager, can they be away from their location for 8 days? What about their family life? You have to have a strong, supportive family. And then the candidate can submit a resume. And then at that time, senior management with LHT, we will look at them, we will do interviews, and then those that have been selected then will come on to the team.
Yeah, and you have a special group. So how do you, when you bring, they come from all over the country. So you've got a big funeral, and you've got
Right.
a high-profile funeral about to take place. So they come from all over the United States. Talk a little bit about training that goes on for a specific event that you do. What's involved in that? When you bring them in, how do you go about that?
Well, it's on-the-job training.
Right.
You could read all the textbooks in the world, if there are any, about how to conduct a funeral service, especially one with moving pieces, with many of them. So when we bring somebody onto the team, we indoctrinate them about what the team does and really just the basics. And then when we have our practices around the country someplace, the new people will go so they can look at and see how it all works.
When you mention practice, tell me what you do when you practice.
Well, we have practices around the country with different organizations. We will be part of that practice. It could be military, it could be government, it could be so many other things. Is who that we work with, family offices. So when we go, that's what we do. We practice with everybody there, and then we start to see where our new team member really excels. He could be an administrative person, because when we go out into the field and deploy the team, everybody is not a funeral director. We have admin people that have to help type, print things, ID things, getting cars for us, getting hotel rooms, feeding, the team. So there's a lot of people in behind the scenes that make all this happen. What you see on TV could be a dozen funeral directors, and they will be doing all kinds of things. In behind them, we have other team people there that are helping to support them.
Unbelievable. All I can say is I tip my hat to what you've done. I do want to go back and talk about your career. If I'm not mistaken, I know you were Army and bomber early on, right?
When I first went into the Army, I was in the middle of mortuary school, and that was a build-up for the Vietnam War in 1966. So I got drafted out of school, and then they sent me to the Army mortuary in Frankfurt, Germany. Well, we had 3 civilians that did the embalming, but there was a handful of us that were embalmers back in the state. So we all embalmed. My main job was I was the supply sergeant. I was in charge of ordering in all the embalming fluid, the caskets. We did about 1,000 calls a year where I was in Frankfurt, Germany. We had 3 locations. So it was a big mortuary system. Some of the guys that I was stationed with, their parents owned funeral homes around the country, and they got drafted just like everybody else. But it was good duty, and I guess that the best part is I met my wife over there. She's from the Czech Republic, and it was on a blind date.
Wow.
And our oldest son, BBJ, was born in Germany. Our plan was not to come back to the United States. I loved Germany so much that I didn't want to come back. So I got out of the Army with it. After about 6 months or so of working there, the Army told me, since my wife is from a communist country and I had a security clearance, And believe me, I didn't know anything. That was a big secret. Said that I had to come back to the United States and be debriefed. Well, my wife and I, BBJ, we packed up, came back to the United States. Believe it or not, we saw nobody. Didn't see anybody from the Army, nothing.
So, folks, just so you know, BBJ is Bob Boetticher Jr. He's a friend of mine, colleague for many years. So that's who he's talking about when he says BBJ. So he's got a son that followed him in this business. So talk about originally, Bob, how did you get in the funeral business, and a little bit about your journey to work alongside Bob Waltrip, who's the founder of Service Corporation International?
Well, I went to a private military high school. It was a boarding school. And they gave the senior class an aptitude test of what occupation are you best at. So mine came back test pilot, I'm afraid of height, real estate agent, which did nothing for me, or a funeral director. And I thought, funeral director, that's kind of cool. So I went to my class advisor, and he took me to the local funeral home in Carlsbad, California. We went on a visit. I really thought, wow, this is really different. And I really started to look into it as a career. Well, when I graduated from high school, I came back to LA. I went around to every funeral home in LA. Nobody would hire me because I didn't have any experience. So I started to get down a little bit. And then one of the funeral homes said, well, there's a mortuary accommodation service called Abbott and Haas. They rent out hearses to funeral homes. They rent out limos for funerals. They run flowers, death certificate, pallbearers, whatever that a funeral director needs. Abbott and Haas had it. So I went to work for them making removals. And then I really worked hard, and then I got to drive the hearse. So that was, good. Then that's when I got drafted and went into the Army. I came back out, went back to mortuary school to finish it all up, went to work for Gates, Kingsley and Gates in Santa Monica. Worked there for a few years. Then one day, Johnny Morrow, that worked for SCI, came into Gates, Kingsley and Gates Chapel and said, we're with SCI and we just bought you. We were the first entry for SCI into California, and that was in 1971, I believe. So I stayed there and then went up to Wyoming. My wife and I were lucky enough to buy 3 little rural funeral homes. How I met Mr. Waltrip was my general manager at Gates, Kingsley and Gates, name was John Moss. He became senior vice president of SCI, but John and I always stayed in contact. When I was the Wyoming funeral director, when I was the president of it, I called John and said, I need a speaker for our convention. He said, what about Bob Waltrip? I didn't know who Bob Waltrip was. So Bob Waltrip came up, really gave a good talk. And then that's when I met him. And we stayed in touch, but not as close friends or anything, just more or less as colleagues. In 2000, actually, I came back to SCI in 83, would still see Mr. Waltrip periodically. Then in 2000, I had done so many things for SCI, Mr. Waltrip asked me to come and work for him.
Right. And you worked side by side with him on the top floor, right? That's where your office was, right?
I was right next door. And he became a mentor to me. He gave me an experience in one life that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. But then in funeral service, and he always had a saying, do the right thing every time. And I've kind of lived by that ever since.
And boy, that's the truth, isn't it? Do
the right thing every time.
The next right thing. You'll go far in life. Isn't that true? Folks, again, this is Bob Boetticher Sr. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. So you're talking
Right.
about Mr. Walter coming and speaking. You've been a much in demand speaker yourself. I know I've made a point to go to a couple of things that you've spoken at, and I'm sure you remember. You spoke at all kind of events. Talk about that and what you speak about.
Well, I have spoken at many national and state conventions, mortuary schools. I guess one of my biggest honors, the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum asked me to come up and speak about state funerals. That was a huge honor for me because it was in Grand Rapids where we buried President Ford. I have many different topics that I can talk about, but what most people ask me to talk about is the history of state funerals. We have rituals in our state funerals that many countries don't have. The riderless horse or the Camp Harrison horse, taps, the 3 volleys over the grave, 21 cannon salute, flag at half staff. Every one of those has a meaning and a history. So I talk about not any particular president. I talk about mainly the history, the components that make up a state funeral. And like with the family, what options do they have? Well, they have plenty of what that they want. So each state funeral is different. A lot of the components are the same, but the message is different.
I also know that you contribute as a writer.
Most of the articles that I write about are all having to do with history. And I'm always scouring, looking for new ideas. And all of my publications that I have done for Southern Calls, the American Funeral Director, is posted on the National Museum of Funeral History on their website. We have a library that's on the website, and every one of those articles are there. I did an 8-piece article on presidential funeral trains. There's only been 8 of them in the history of our country, starting with Abraham Lincoln and ending with, so far, George Bush. And a funeral train really adds a lot to a state funeral because there's only 8 of them in there. I try to find somebody that is really good. I was down in Florida, is visiting a good friend of mine, Joe Sewer. And Joe's neighbor I met, and he said, Bob, my great-grandfather was P.T. Barnum of the Barnum and Bailey Circus. I said, you got to be kidding. So that started my brain moving, and I wrote a feature on P.T. Barnum. I wrote one on Buffalo Bill Cody, but I just don't write about their life. I write about their funerals.
Right.
So I kind of write backwards. I first go and look up in old newspapers everything that I can find on that funeral. Because back then in the 1890s, 1900s, the newspaper was like the TV. They were very detailed.
Yeah, oh yeah. I do the same. Yeah, it's unbelievable. They talk about everything, that how many people were there and what they did. Yep, very, very true. Very true.
And so I take a snippet from this article and a snippet from that one, and I'm able to piece back what happened at the funeral.
Right.
And sometimes some of these people will have like the P.T. Barnum, he has a museum. And they were very helpful in giving me information. And I, with P.T. Barnum, when I got through with the article, I sent it to him to be sure that if the readers out there are giving me a half hour of their time, I want them to read something that's accurate. So as I said, I start backwards. I start with the funeral, and then whatever space, I use about 2,000 words. If I use 1,500 words on the funeral, then his bio will be 500 words. So I don't do the bio first and then the funeral, because everybody reading wants to know about the funeral. It's very interesting. I love doing it. I did one on, are you afraid to be buried alive? All of the different contraptions from the patent office that people patented, with an air chamber down there, a bell that you could pull on it if you wake up, and the sexton in the cemetery would hear the bell. So there's a lot of history out there that I try to find, I write on it, and I speak on it.
You also have television credits. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was called, the very first one that I ever did was a pilot for 6 Feet Under. And it was all done by phone, because that they would say what was in the embalming room in 1954 or 1960 or 1970. And I helped them acquire the embalming fluid bottles that they were going to need. The set designers, the detail that these people went into was absolutely incredible. Well, once that we got the pilot done, they asked me to come out to California and go through the sets. And when I went into the embalming room, I mean, the tile walls, they had painted little cracks in the. I mean, who's going to see little cracks in ceramic tile? But the detail. And then I was on call because once they started filming, they had to go back into the 50s. And they said, Bob, what would not have been in there? So I had a inventory of what they had. I said, well, take this out, change the apron, change the gloves, change this and change that. So that was really a good experience. A movie that was filmed here, it was a TV series called A Woman of Independent Means with Sally Field and Charles Durning. And they took her from a teenager all the way up to age 80. So what was a thrill for me, Sally Field was the executive producer. And she came into the museum and she picked out the different cars, hearses we had, and horse-drawn hearses to be used in the movie. And I remember that we were filming a scene with her. I played the Undertaker. I didn't have a speaking part. I just sat up on the hearse and climbed down a couple of times.
That's great.
And the wardrobe department gave me a pair of white gloves. And I said, this isn't right. She said, why? And I said, Undertakers didn't wear white gloves. Pallbearers did. Undertakers wore gray gloves. Well, you're going to wear the white. Okay. About 20 minutes later, I could see a golf cart flying down a dirt road who was approaching us pretty quick. And it was Sally Field. And her hair was all up in rollers, and she was in a bathrobe because she was getting ready to get dressed. And we were filming the scene of her mother's funeral. And she said, I got one word, and I want a one-word answer. I said, what's that? She says, white or gray? I said, gray. Within about 2 minutes, you could see the costume department. They were flying down to where I was, and then they switched out. I happened to have had my own gray gloves, so I used my own. And
what a story.
Yeah,
What a
yeah.
story.
And then we did Kill Bill. Then we still get calls periodically for cars and things like that they may want to use in movies.
I'm sure. Bob, you got so much stuff here. I got to have you back. I hope you'll come back, and we got so much we can talk about here. I want to ask you one question for people that are listening to this that may be young and not in this business. If we have people thinking about that and thinking about going into this business, and my goodness, we need good people in it, what would you tell them?
One is you have to be dedicated. It has to be something that you care so much about that that's all that you mainly think about. And if you're going to become a funeral director, as Mr. Walter said, do the right thing every time. Sometimes we lose sight of our families. They come in, they sit down in front of you, off you go. Is making the arrangements. But are you really serving them the way they want to be served? When my father died, it's the first time I've ever been on the other side of the desk. And I remember thinking when the funeral director was waiting on us, you better not mess this up because this is my dad. And that's something that we need to think about every single day and every single family that you wait on. They don't care if you got in a fight with your wife, if you're behind on a bill, your kids are causing you problems. They don't care. All they care about is you treat them with the utmost respect and the deceased that they laid their trust in you to take care of. Because don't forget what I said earlier, you lose that trust factor of that family. It doesn't matter how many times you apologize. You've lost that family. They're gone, and they're going to probably tell about 30 other people.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And if you do it right, they also tell about 30 other people.
Right.
And that's how you grew this. That's how you grow any business. You do the right thing, and you treat people with respect and honor, and you know what you're doing, and you're equipped to handle what you're doing. You can have all the good intentions of the world, but if you're not trained to do it, it probably won't happen, right?
And don't be afraid when they ask you a question. If you don't know the answer, don't think that you have to come up with an answer right then and there. Say, I don't know the answer, but let me find out. And also, being a funeral director, deliver on what you promise. Don't let anything fall in between, the cracks. Very easy to do. Oh, Mrs. Jones, I'll call you tomorrow morning. A month has gone by and you forgot. Probably the last thing is, when you get knocked down, get back up. When I went to work for the accommodation service, Abbott and Hass, I went on my first removal. And when I went to the home, the deceased made a mess everywhere. So when I got back to the funeral home, I made myself sick. And I called my parents and said, this isn't for me. I mean, I'd only been there like 6 hours. So my parents came down that night, and I'll never forget it. They sat in the lobby, and my dad said, well, here's something else we can add to the list of things you never completed. He said, nobody would give you a job until Ron Hass gave you a job. This is how you pay him back. And he made me so mad that our dispatcher walked through the lobby and said, I have a removal, but I'll give it to somebody else. And I snatched the paper out of his hand, said, no, I'm doing it. And that was 58 years ago. So if my parents hadn't come down and kicked my butt pretty good, I don't know what I would be doing today.
People in your life for a reason, right? Bob, when it's all said and done, what do you want people to remember about Bob Boetticher?
Mainly that I was a dedicated funeral director. I believe in high standards in funeral service, and he gave back. I try to help as many people as I can that are just coming up in the ranks of funeral service, and a good father. Because I've had such a supportive family. My wife and our three kids. I missed a lot of birthdays, like a lot of you have done, and a lot of holidays, because our jobs called for us, and they supported me. It was really good. I remember one time in Jackson Hole, I really got busy. I'd promised that I would be home for lunch, and I couldn't. So my wife and the kids, they packed up a picnic lunch, and they came to the funeral home, and we had a picnic on the grass. So they came to me. Another time, I had to work Thanksgiving when I was an apprentice. And my grandmother and my mother, that there were 6 of us on that night, they brought in a full Thanksgiving dinner for us. So your family is most important to make you a successful funeral director. If you don't have their support, you're in trouble.
And when you're in this business, you see that clearer than most other people, because 1 minute you're here and 1 minute you're gone. And you know what's really important. Folks, this has been Bob Boetticher. He is a hero in this profession. He's a consummate funeral director and human being. Bob, thank you so much for being on here.
Well, Bruce, thank you for inviting me. It was an honor.
Thank you, sir.
Viewing life from from a hearse. It could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.